Okay. Well, I mean, thank you all very, very much for including me in this discussion. I heard just a little bit of the conversation of the panel, and it only made me even more disappointed not to be with you in person. Sounds like a great gathering going on there today. I thought I would kick us off starting about the discussion of art in the challenges of both broader social challenges and particularly sustainability with the story of Oedipus. This is a very familiar story. I'm sure known to all of you. King Laius and Queen Jocasta of Thebes are warned their son will grow up to kill his father and marry his mother, so they send their baby off into the mountains to die. But instead, Oedipus is brought to a neighboring kingdom where he is raised by a different king and queen. Years later, rumors of the prophecy reach Oedipus as a young man, and not wanting to harm the people he thinks are mom and dad, he runs away, ending up right back where he was born. And there, Oedipus gets into an argument with an old man, kills him, and this, of course, is his father, King Laius. Fleeing the crime, Oedipus encounters the Sphinx, who challenges him with a riddle. Oedipus answers the riddle, wins the crown, marries his recently widowed mother, and together they have 4 children. Years later, as plague descends over the kingdom, Tiresias, a blind prophet, wanders into the kingdom to tell Oedipus who he is and what he has done. Finally, seeing the truth of his life, Oedipus gouges out his eyes. So why do we keep telling this story, right? Given that few of us are in a position to accidentally kill our father or marry our mother, some other existential possibility is clearly drawing us to the power of this narrative. The 18th century writer Jean de La Fontaine captured this perfectly. We often meet our destiny on the road we took to avoid it. The pull of Oedipus on our imaginations is not the Freudian fear of marrying our mother, but of being fatally counterproductive, stuck on a particular pathway where our efforts to change course not only fail, but turn out to be the very forces feeding us to our fate in the first place. Now, that particular path to ruin is known as a pathological ideology, a way of trying to solve problems that inadvertently makes those problems worse. It's a common feature of systems in crisis, whether corporations or communities or societies. And this curiosity about the role of the arts in our society, for me, begins here with the story of Oedipus and this idea of a pathological ideology, pointing our attention to the ironies at the heart of our sustainability efforts. Are we caught in our own pathological ideology here? Are we nearing the climax of our own Oedipal tale? Are we meeting our destiny on the road that we took to avoid it? For my part, it's important to flag that I speak entirely from a Western perspective on this. First, just as a way of putting clear limitations on my own perspective and not pass these ideas off as vaguely universal in reach or relevance. And secondly, because the crises we are facing have such distinctly Western roots. We in the West often idealize non-Western perspectives as a strategy for going over to someone else's house to play instead of facing the mess that we have made in our own. A climate crisis, a biodiversity crisis, techno-dystopia, culture wars, political polarization, global conflict. Add the present state of America, and the mood in the air right now is clear. Everything sucks. And it sucks in such a confusing way. We're in the midst of making machines intelligent while getting dumber ourselves. We're in a race to send life into outer space, but we can't take the basic steps to protect it here on Earth. The problems this society, this system that we are in, can solve, it is solving in astonishing ways, while the problems it cannot solve are getting worse by the day, no matter how hard we seem to try. Look, for example, at the past decade of climate action, where we see massive efforts in law, policy, technology, knowledge, and finance, and yet so little progress to show for it. So I'm only sort of joking when I say that the mathematics we need in order to model the climate crisis, we actually learn in grade 3. For it's here that we discover the power of zero, that you can multiply a whole bunch of numbers together, big numbers times big numbers, but if just one of those numbers is zero, it doesn't matter how big the other numbers get, the result will be zero. Ecologists talk about this as Liebig's law of the minimum, where yield is proportionate to the essential nutrient in least supply. No matter how much of the other good stuff you pour in, only that missing minimum ingredient counts. So what is the nutrient in least supply in our sustainability efforts? Where is the zero in our equation, neutralizing all the other good work going on elsewhere? Which gap is the crucial gap? Ask different people this question, you get really different answers, right? We don't know enough, so it's a knowledge gap. Or there's something we haven't invented yet, so it's a technology gap. Or we just need to ban and incentivize appropriately, so we see this as a policy gap. Or we haven't put enough money where our mouth is, so this comes down to a finance gap. Now, the reason we are here today, however, is because we all share a different instinct that the gap limiting sustainability progress, the zero in our equation, is best identified as the culture gap. And that the culture gap in the climate crisis is bigger than the policy gap or the technology gap or the knowledge gap. And when I say that to people, there's a kind of intuitive recognition and then lots of questions. What is the culture gap? Where did it come from? Why does it matter now? And how are we going to do something about it? We can begin by defining the culture gap as the difference between the need to think and speak and intervene at the level of being or ontology and a society's capacity to do so. Don't worry if that is not entirely clear right now. I will deepen that definition as we go on. For now, and especially for the anthropologists in the room, the move that I'm making here is to associate cultural capacity with ontological agency and characterizing a lack of ontological agency, an inability to work at the level of being, as the culture gap in our problem solving. So here I suggest we can demystify this famously elusive concept of being by breaking it down into its component parts, an operating system comprised of different elements like meaning, identity, value, belief, belonging, purpose, time, and place. I'm not entirely sure of this, but my instinct is that something qualifies to be an element of being if it does more to shape our encounters with the world than our encounters with the world do to shape it. While obscure to us, collective intentional intervention at the level of being is not uncommon in human cultures and was not always uncommon in the West. Think, for example, of the decline of ritual in Western rational liberal individualist societies. That is an illustration of the culture gap emerging. But why did it happen? One way to make sense of Western rational Enlightenment thinking is as a long and convoluted effort to trade ontological agency for epistemological agency, to trade a capacity to work at the level of being for a capacity to work at the level of knowing, an exchange that we might characterize as one of meaning versus information. So isn't that actually a good idea? From the perspective of modern scientific societies, life everywhere else looks nasty, brutish, short, and epistemically challenged. Who wants to try and survive bubonic plague by fighting the bacterium Yersinia pestis with nothing but prayers and supplication? That's the journey of Western materialism. The pursuit of a reality free of human meanings where those unhelpful dimensions of being no longer get in the way. Now, information, knowledge, science, and technology are free to scale human agency, first to industrial levels, then to planetary levels, whereupon we arrive at a place known as the Anthropocene. And that's when the journey stops going so well. The temperatures begin to climb, the oceans rise, the forests burn, and plants and animals depart in record numbers by the day. So what do? We double down on the convictions of our own world. We create the largest international effort to solve a problem in human history. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change generates mountains of inescapable facts and pours this information across the world. and yet the forests keep burning, the oceans keep rising, and emissions climb higher than ever. Which brings us to the point in the story where the old blind prophet shows up, and he brings us out into the night and he says, "What's wrong?" And we say, "Oh, it's climate change, it's this really big problem that we're trying to solve." And he nods and walks with us for a while, and then he says, "Well, what is the climate?" Now, we're full of science and information, so we know the answer to this question. It's atmospheric gases, solar energy, planetary albedo. Is that all? Says the prophet, looking at us with a puzzled expression. And then before turning to leave us alone under the night sky, he adds, "So what's the problem?" There in the dark, we feel the shortcomings of our response. We look up into the sky, knowing there is now far more to the climate than that. We see an atmosphere made of energy grids, climate accords, voting patterns, transportation systems, dietary choices, bucket list vacations, fast fashion, and other cultural acts. Despite centuries of effort trying to eradicate them from our reality, dimensions of being are now floating around in parts per million above our heads. To our horror, we grasp our circumstance as a moment of tragic irony only Oedipus could appreciate. Faced with the peril of living in a reality built from dimensions of being, epistemically speaking, in our ability to know the world, we banish them from our understanding of planetary realities, which, of course, is the only way dimensions of being can actually build those realities ontologically speaking in what the world is. Trying to come to terms with anthropogenic global change is best understood as an Oedipal reckoning. The tragedy of Oedipus climaxes in the moment he realizes he has become an impossible thing unto himself. Husband, son to his wife, brother, father to his children. Now, here, in the entanglements of the Anthropocene, scientific materialism has become an impossible thing unto itself. Observer, creator to our planet, objective, constitutive to its realities. As the materialist world crumbles under a sky made of human meanings, we meet our destiny on the road we took to avoid it. Yet without understanding this moment in Oedipal terms, we fail to step back and steer our sustainability agendas in a different direction. Instead, we dial up the urgency, putting our system into overdrive and delivering ourselves into the tragic irony of our pathological ideology. Behold sustainability's compulsive relationship to the information deficit model of behavior change. Now, even if you've never heard of the information deficit model of behavior change, you do it, and it is done to you all the time. If a society is stuck with a culture gap, if it has swapped ontological agency for epistemological agency, this is how it tries to solve its problems. The axiomatic theory of change in Western societies, the only way we know for making things better, where new information generates new knowledge, which generates new values, which produces new behavior. An elegant equation distilling the way society makes progress down to just two verbs, knowing and doing. The only problem is it doesn't work very well. Our map says there's a long straight road leading from what people know to what people do, but every time we go down that road, we fall into a great big hole. Now, the only thing more surprising than discovering the hole is discovering we already knew it was there. It's called the knowledge action gap, and researchers have been identifying it for 50 years. Now, at first, this should strike us as bizarre that our rational, information optimizing society knows that this doesn't work, it goes on using it anyway. But if we think about it for a moment, it's actually a perfect illustration of the bind that we are in, that our ideology has become a pathology, that our determination to live in a world of true information instead of meaningful experience has run aground. The best proof that the information deficit model doesn't work is to spend 50 years providing ourselves with the information that the information deficit model doesn't work, and to notice how little impact this has on our use of information deficit models. What better way to feel the broken narrative of progress we are left with? Before we grab the pins and poke out our eyes, there may be cause for hope. Over the past few years, I've been working with a team of graduate students to track a rapid shift in academic and non-academic sustainability literature post-SDGs, so post-2015. Here we see a sudden burst of enthusiasm for priorities of transformation and transformative change. What is this about? While scanning the literature does not yield a clear sense of what is meant by transformation, clearly we are reaching for some difference in this growing appeal. Press people on what that difference might be, and the typical answer is an intensification of status quo efforts, right? A quantitative difference, in other words, everything we're doing, but bigger, faster, and more. Now, if that is our working definition of transformation, we are in trouble. For if we are delivering ourselves to our pathological ideology, trying to speed that process up is a dumb thing to do. And yet if we back up from the technical and expository appeals to transformation, and we consider this change in sustainability discourse more as a zeitgeist than a strategy, a more promising definition of transformation can be found right under our noses. You can just ask people, if something has transformed, what has happened to it? Has it learned something different? Has it done something different? Or has it become something different? Everyone immediately holds on that last option. Everyone intuitively knows that transformation happens at the level of ontology, change at the level of being, not change in what we know or what we do, but change in what we are. In this regard, we see this growing collective intuition, this growing preoccupation with transformative change as pointing right at the culture gap, as trying to move us beyond the knowledge action paradigm, beyond knowing and doing, to a sense of this as a being problem, a crisis of ontology. Complex problems require transformative change, which requires ontological agency. The only problem is centuries of Western materialism, Enlightenment rationality, and liberal individualism have eradicated our collective capacity to work at the level of being. We got rid of it in favor of epistemological agency, capacity at the level of knowing. And that is the culture gap in the sustainability crisis. The difference between the need for transformative change and a society's ability to work at the level of being, to engage with itself in ontological terms. And before we despair and accept that our pathological ideology is inescapable, and like Oedipus we can do nothing but follow our destiny into demise, we have one last trick up our collective sleeve. You can simply turn to the person next to you and ask them to recall a transformative encounter with art. A novel they read, a painting they stood in front of, an album that came out, a movie they saw, where the world became a different place or they became a different person. Everyone has an answer to this question. Suddenly, these strange and obscure concepts of being and transformation become immediate and biographical. We can all talk about change at the level of being, and one of the easiest ways for us to do so is through our experience of the arts. In this, art enters our lives as an agent of being, a force that can shape and reshape not what we know or what we do, but what we are. And perhaps for this reason, the past decade has witnessed an explosion of interest in art from complex problems like sustainability, climate health, mental health, public health, poverty reduction, leadership challenges. So just as we see an increased call for transformative change, we see increased interest in the role of arts in these challenges. The ability of our collective intuition to arrive at this strategy for escaping our destiny is amazing. Less amazing, however, is our ability to then do this in practice. Pathological ideologies die hard. They are the system asserting itself in a desperate act of survival. Instead of art joining sustainability as an agent of being, able to move climate action beyond its pathological ideology, the opposite tends to happen. We recognize the transformative power of art as a tacit and intuitive level, and then the conscious intentionality of the system kicks in, and we enlist the arts in information deficit approaches to behavior change, converting it into an agent of knowing and disenchanting the very power for which the help of art was sought in the first place. Strengthening the art sustainability relationship relies on protecting the arts from a pathological faith in information, in knowing better. And a lot of the empirical work I'm doing right now is on how to do that, the theory and method behind which we can move the arts and secure their presence as an agent of being. And we can take that up in discussion. For now, we can just summarize. Sustainability is a challenge of transformation. Transformative change operates at the level of being, carrying us beyond changes in what we know and do to changes in what we are. We are in the end game of a long history that has separated being and understanding, questions of what we are from questions of what the world is. This has left materialist cultures largely unable to navigate transformative change. This is the culture gap in the climate crisis. Yet before we gouge out our eyes, remember those transformative encounters with art. We can work at the level of being. It's happened to all of us. Art can do this. But when we try and do that with art, when we want its effects rather than its processes, that is the system fighting back against transgression. Here, instead of art pulling us beyond our pathological ideology, the system pulls art inside it, turning art from an agent of being to an agent of knowing, neutralizing its capacity for ontological agency and its powers of transformation. Sustainability requires us to rebuild many different kinds of infrastructure in accordance with an evolving appreciation of planetary realities. We need new physical infrastructure to reduce energy use and waste. We need new transportation infrastructure to lower emissions associated with moving around. We need new energy infrastructure to shift towards efficient renewables, and new political infrastructure to avoid the many tragedies of the commons. And while we've spent a lot of time and energy developing these different infrastructures, there's one that we keep forgetting to build. What sustainability desperately needs right now is the infrastructure that bridges the culture gap, that provides us with the ontological agency to pursue change at the level of being, and that connects all the other different infrastructures we've been building into a road that actually leads us out of here. And that is the symbolic infrastructure. The infrastructure of meaning, identity, value, belief, belonging, purpose, time, and place. And this, as human civilizations demonstrate over and over throughout history, is the most powerful infrastructure of all. If we can move the power of the arts closer to sustainability without disenchanting its impact through our pathological assumption of generating information and building knowledge infrastructure, then we will begin assembling the symbolic infrastructure needed to close the culture gap. We will get the zero out of our sustainability equations, and we will find ourselves on the other side of this crisis, wondering why we thought it was so hard to solve in the first place. Thank you very much.
David, thank you so much. We really enjoyed your lecture here, and it is something that we were discussing here at iASK as well on several occasions, these topics. And I would like to continue now with the set of questions and answers, because I don't want anybody to forget what you said, so I want to continue this conversation right now. So I have already a few questions lining up. So let me. Okay, Gabor Soros wanted the question first. He was the first one to raise the hand.
Thank you very much. If you don't mind, I stay seated. Thank you Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay,
thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, David, for this amazing talk. I am Secretary General of the Hungarian National Commission for UNESCO, and I understand you are from Canada, and I'm on very good terms with your Secretary General there, Gerard Yves. So, since you spoke in myths first, maybe I will try to shorten my talk by referring to myths as well. So you spoke about Oedipus. Okay, the words encounter somehow resonated very much with me. The fact that you spoke about civilizations in the plural also. So first, what would you think about exploring our own, as you said that we should first do the work at home. So Oedipus, Sisyphus, and Icarus. I think what you said about Western patterns of knowledge and doing is very much Icarus. What you say about sustainability is not only because of the assonance, but it somehow resonates with Sisyphus for me. But what you say about encounter and change, I think that's a really interesting thing, how to achieve that kind of change. And this is the question, do you think an encounter between civilizations, maybe religions even, by art, involving art's transformative power, could get us to a common symbolic infrastructure which would somehow pave the way towards this ontological change from knowing to being, and by being somehow, because the things you said about the new traffic infrastructure and all those physical things are only achievable if we have a metanoia, if we have a change of mindset that can lead us to a different kind of being. So I don't know, I mean, that would just be a start, and I would really like to continue that conversation with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gabor. That's a beautiful response. And I'm so heartened to sort of hear the ideas being resonant in the room. I agree very much that a source of this may come through cross-cultural experiences, particularly given that the West has forgotten how to do this. I think that there's been a steady structural de-emphasis of this kind of work, this being a part of our society, of how we make sense of ourselves, that we have steadily over centuries removed this component. It's sort of like it's become the appendix, and you can just take it out and nothing bad will happen. Well, that was true for a while. We went on an amazing adventure riding the power of epistemological agency, and there was no sense that we would suddenly need to have a kind of reflexive and explicit relationship with ontological agency, the need to shape ourselves at the level of being. In Canada, we see a really interesting illustration of the point that you make, because we have been living uncomfortably side by side with Indigenous cultures that we colonized and tried to eradicate, and yet they persisted. And they hung on to a very different civilizational set of instincts. And particularly because they lived outside of the norms of Western society, ontological agency became a very explicit part of their work. Understanding themselves at the level of being and needing to be able to cultivate, nurture, enrich, solidify those dimensions of being within an Indigenous perspective became life and death for those cultures. So now, for example, when we're looking at our materialist, rationalist society and we're saying, well, where do we go to figure out what it takes to build symbolic infrastructure or work with ourselves in ontological terms at the level of being? We can watch the way in which decolonization is happening in Canada. The illustration that I find particularly concrete is in the very clinical context of health. For example, when Indigenous people are giving birth to their babies in clinical environments, like a Western, maternity ward in a hospital, they bring in practices like smudging and other ritualistic practices that they want in that environment with them. And so it's just sort of an immediate illustration of, I think, the broader point that you're talking about, which is to say, where do we go now to refill our capacity to work at the level of ontology? And I think that cross-civilizational piece is a really important one. I think it can do very, very valuable work for a broader international agenda around decolonization. But really, the issue is self-serving. The West needs to figure out how to do this in order for it to access the resources it has lost in being able to steer its own ship to some extent. Does that sort of grasp some of the things that you were getting at, Gabor? I know there was a lot more in your response, but I just thought I would start there.
I see him nodding his head, so I think it's
Okay, right. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I think what you said, I spoke about the Onge tribe this morning on the Andaman Islands, how they escaped the tsunami. And I think that traditional knowledge system is a proof that we have things to learn without a romantic idea of, changing our role for them. I would like, from what you said, I think there is something in the word encounter that rhymes with that. Encounter means I count on you, you count for me, and we together count. Maybe we can explore that idea further. Thank you very much.
And it's in that, I mean, maybe I'm being opportunistic here, but what we're looking for, what is the difference between an engagement that is predicated on an exchange of information versus an engagement that is predicated on an exchange of some kind of relationality? And that's where I think maybe if I'm playing with that sense of encounter, it's so important. What do the arts actually do that's different than giving somebody a pamphlet about climate facts? They engage us at an embodied level. They work with our emotions. They work with our bodily sensations. They do all kinds of things for us beyond the kind of exchange of some difference in our cognitive grasp of something. And I think nothing does that to another human than sitting in a room with or being with, encountering another human. The whole social capacity of humanity is that when we are with people, we become artifacts of the people that we are with. Sometimes that can be a negative thing, but it's nonetheless the kind of thing that drives social bonding. In relationship, I become an artifact of the relationships that I'm in. So if we can use that in this principle of encounter, I think that it takes us exactly where I'm hoping we can go with shifting the way that we engage with sustainability. Putting things into relational terms, putting them into ritual practices is about acknowledging that we need to actually include a part of ourselves that normally gets excluded from sustainability dialogues. And then when you want to take an individual and move them towards all those other infrastructures, the technology infrastructure or energy infrastructure or whatever, it's like you're asking them to go walk on the moon without giving them a spacesuit. They just don't have the capacity. If you do not have the meanings and the identities and the values and the beliefs and the sense of belonging and place that you need to practice life in a sustainable world, you won't go there. Nobody will. And I think the sustainability world has done a disservice to the public imagination by just trying to inform and then shame. Those are the sort of two things that it tries to do, rather than create the larger structure by which all humans need to go and inhabit a world that is fundamentally different than their own.
Thank you. We have a question from Franz Graf, who is our colleague who is going to speak tomorrow about environmental humanities from Vienna.
Thank you very much. Thanks for introducing me. Hi, David. Thank you very much for your talk. I utterly enjoyed it. It was like very refreshing. You know, we had lots of, so to say, pessimistic talks, and yours did really touch a point. And I like how you turn the kind of epistemological questions to ontological questions. And as you mentioned, anthropology, and I would like to call myself an anthropologist, I'd like to ask one or two questions actually regarding this turn, so to say. Anthropology has been strong in theorizing about the ontological turn, and I wonder how you deal with the critique to the ontological turners that they had to leave out quite some aspects of realities of the indigenous worlds they were studying and their experiences. aspects like colonialism, imperialism or neo-imperialism, neoliberalism, capitalism, in a way to make their thoughts on the ontological agency work. That's the first question. The second question is, how would you, in your kind of conceptualization, then reframe those agencies that have worked for decades with a lot of money and power as well to counter the knowledge, the kind of epistemological basis that we have to think about climate change, the lobby for fossil industry, the fossil fascists in many states over the world, and how would you reframe their also successful ways of discrediting the IPCC and all those movements that have led until up to founding the IPCC. So I hope you apologize. It's a bit of a critical question, but I really enjoyed it, and thank you very much.
Yeah. No, I don't hear that in critical terms at all, Franz. Thank you. I feel like this basic theme has been with the question of trying to return ontology to the way that we make sense of ourselves for the past century or so. And I see it as the tension between a political analysis and an ontological analysis, and the tension between ontology and politics that doesn't fit together terribly well. We can look at this historically in one of the founding fathers of questions of being, Martin Heidegger, and the path that his obsession with ontological agency took him on. And I'm assuming the room probably has an acute awareness that he ended up being very much aligned with National Socialism in Germany and never really fully renounced that, to a lot of people's chagrin. But it was this, when I try and look at myself and I try and think of questions of being and how I activate them in myself, what do they turn to in terms of practice? And the relationship to politics is often an uncomfortable place where this leads. So then you see the kind of tension between ontology being first philosophy in Heidegger's world to a move towards ethics being first philosophy by the middle of the 20th century. And I feel there's good reason for that. We can move to a contemporary analysis of this and look at this tension between meaning and information that I evoked as a tension between ontological agency and epistemological agency, that we see, look at the relative values of those currencies, meaning versus information, in the political divide in the United States, right? The Republican Party clearly doesn't give a damn about information. They're not worried about whether they're building a politics or peddling a discourse premised on information. They and it's hilarious when sort of a hard right Republican tells you that the earth is flat, and a Democrat gets so excited at that point because they think that they can prove that that is wrong. And you watch them trying to wield the information sword at the meaning shield, and it does nothing to penetrate. And so I feel like there's illustrations of the larger point that you're talking about, both historically and as a real contemporary problem. When we raise it in terms of contemporary US politics, then we can really see that this is something that progressive politics have got to deal with. Because progressivism in the world, whether it's been about broader political agendas or about sustainability and climate politics in particular, has tried to build this on the path of information, on the path of epistemological agency. And we watch the way it holds no currency for people in terms of the lives that they're trying to live. And then we sit back and we marvel at the fact that anybody could ever vote for a kind of far-right political agency, but it's because we live in a realm where epistemological agency has served us. And I think this also explains why there's often a kind of educational and socioeconomic divide along these lines. Because if you are going to replace ontological agency in your life with epistemological agency in your life, you have to be able to invest heavily in the knowledge infrastructure of your life. If you're going to steer your boat by knowledge infrastructure alone, you need to turn your knowledge muscle into a much stronger entity. And so we see the way in which there's a kind of divide between the socioeconomic and educational dimensions of this about who lives on the currency of meaning and who lives on the currency of information, which I find rooted in the larger problem that you raised. I am familiar with the ontological turn in anthropology, and I've worked to some extent with some of the material that has happened there. I'm not I don't think I'm sophisticated enough in that grasp to understand the way in which that turn has been critiqued for what I would assume is an inability to deal with the political dimensions of its arguments. And so I'd love to actually take that topic up with you and learn. I think you probably got a lot more to tell me about that than I do to tell you. But that basic dynamic of the tension between ontology and politics, meaning and information, we see throughout the history of trying to resuscitate ontological agency, and the way in which it's very strong in reactionary forms now in right-wing politics. And the left has tried to stick to its sort of IPCC, information-centered knowledge infrastructure, epistemological agency foundations, and noticing that is like, that's trying to fight, it's like a gap in eras where we're using, Bronze Age technologies and they've moved on. And so we need to figure out how to work at the level of being, how to bring ontological agency into progressive conversations and reconcile this tension between the epistemic and the ontological. I don't know if that sort of sheds some light on what you're talking to, but on that other point, I would just love to learn from you on what you raise about the.
Okay. Hi, David. I'm Ferenc Miszlivec. I got the idea to invite you from Milan Csabai, who's unfortunately not with us, and because we are here jet lagged to compare to North America, and we still have 2 presentations, and then our wonderful participants here from all over the world, from 52 countries, are not all of them, but most of them waiting for wine tasting, which is how to say it, it's ontological determination here. I can kind of pass my question. If you have a short answer, please give it to me. If not, then we should start to correspond. What happens if we eliminate zero? And how would you do it? I mean, it was an invention, and for many reasons it helped trade, market society, capitalism. What would happen to the bank system? How would the Danish tell the Americans that they would buy California for $3 billion or $1 trillion? So how would you do that? And that's a personal question. Are you still practicing piano?
I started to when I was thinking I was going to come there. I got really scared and I thought I better get my chops in shape. But maybe that's the answer to the first question. A short answer to eliminate. Yeah, sorry. I can't tell if I'm hearing my own echo or. Okay. I feel like there's something more philosophically loaded in the question of eliminating zero in a sort of broader level. It's certainly in terms of the sense that I offer it here, what we're seeing is in that ecological sense, there are 15 things that you need in order to make that tree grow. And one of those is missing, and even if you double down on the 14 other things, it doesn't matter. The absence of that 15th essential ingredient is going to limit the growth of that tree. And the argument is that's what's happening within the sustainability world. We're doing so much stuff so well, but there's one piece that we continue to ignore, and it becomes that zero in our equation that neutralizes all those other efforts across the board. And so it's not about saying, you see a lot in academia, let's go in there and completely change everything that we're doing. I want all of the work that we're doing in finance and technology, all that to continue, but unless we develop the capacity to work explicitly and reflexively at an ontological level, all that other work will be futile.
And Professor János Bogardi wanted to ask something, so if you can.
Thank you very much. 2 short questions. The first is, if I look back, human history is a history of empires. Empires emerged before the Western civilization or this epistemological materialistic world emerged. And this sequence is a question is, were these a pre-Western civilization, or can we escape this human history trap to fall again and again into a hegemonistic system. The second question is, you were mentioning learning the being. Is being a universal term, or is it culturally embedded? And if the later one is true, the different beings, wouldn't they lead again to competition, if not to say to wars or confrontations? Thank you.
I'm sorry.
I wonder if I...
So we just really briefly, because we have to move on to the next presentation because of the wine tasting. I'm so sorry.
Yeah. No, not at all. I don't want to get in the way. That is the ritual that I'm ultimately recommending to the room. Really quickly on this, I think it's true that the need to, when you see, for example, the argument about religious conflict, and you see, take for example the Fertile Crescent right now, and the clash of empires taking place in Gaza. One would say that those are two cultures working aggressively from a place of being, and the inability or the effort in a materialist West to kind of rationalize and move beyond. I've often thought one of the great impetuses for the scientific revolution and Western rationalism was the religious wars. Spending a century in conflict in religious wars, being the sort of thing that goes, this is not a way of adjudicating right and wrong. We need a very different way of doing that. And so the impetus to remove being from society and to go back to some of the ideas that Franz also suggested, you could see that it has a great political benefit to try and get this out of the way and move towards the kind of economic or scientific rationality that creates a universality. The problem is that it doesn't seem to go away in my case, in my observation. We're seeing it, instead of it being cultivated progressively, we're seeing it emerge in highly reactionary form. So maybe that's a way of answering that question, but saying it looks like people have dimensions of being, meaning making, identity, value, belief, and need to belong, sense of time and place. Those dimensions seem to have a universality. I'm happy to get clobbered by comparative anthropology on that one, but it seems like there's something in the way in which all humans have those drives and those forces working within them. And we've done, I think, just a peculiar thing with those dimensions in the West in the way in which we've subjugated them. And then watching them now emerge in the kind of reactionary politics of the past decade or so.
Thank you so much. And now I can announce our next speaker. That's Professor András Nagy from University of Pannonia. And without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Professor András Nagy.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. I try to be very quick because wine tasting is a really important event, and we have another, hopefully also interesting and important presentation. Now, I was very happy to follow online mainly the conversations, and I enjoy very much, and I also think and hope that after this presentation and after Professor Mizsei's presentations there will be also a lively discussion. I am talking about art creativity in the future in a sense that this will give you some maybe more food of thinking, more ideas. So it's not a kind of systematically where we are going from here for in which direction, but to kind of inspire something that is going back in ages and may look into the future. I also want to mention that I have a kind of dual identity, so I work as an academic and I work also as a writer, and I try to combine these two things, and I realize that this is being combined also in the identity of the art and of science. Is art really indispensable, we may ask, art and or as science? Are artists taken seriously? Should they be? What does history tell us? What etymology of the word art refer to? Are there interactions, interconnections, and interference between art and science in the past, in the present time? What do case studies suggest, and what about the future, if there will be one? These would be the questions that I want to deal with very, very briefly, and also, in a sense, just to provide some ideas, some possibilities to think about future possibilities. I am not really good in this. Oh, sorry. And I just want to focus first when art is deprived. and the resilience. On the Gulag, there was On the Gulag, there was an incredible explosion of spontaneous art, which was the art of tattoo. That was both a kind of fantastic set of symbolism, and there was a fantastic book about how prisoners who didn't have any access to art were, in a sense, demanding that they would be decorated as if there is no other decoration whatsoever in the world. So this is, again, when art is absolutely missing from a world, how it is being created. And there is a very famous Hungarian play, The Tragedy of Man by Imre Modács, and there is a kind of dystopia that he was writing about the so-called phalanster, where people are totally deprived of any kind of creative artistic activity, and yet there is something that is being born all the time, so it's not possible to eliminate. Oops, sorry, I'm really sorry about the... Well, I go back and... that is when science and art meet. So artists, can we trust them? There is Dostoevsky, the conservative, the depressive, someone who gave all his legacy to Pobedonostsev, the great Tsarist ideologist. And there is Salvador Dali, who you wouldn't think that you would let your children raised by him. And yet, even if artists you may not want to trust, but art you do want and you can trust. And sometimes art is not only smarter than we are, but much smarter than the artists themselves, as we know it also from the history. If we are looking back into the history, how the whole scientific thinking started with Heraclitus, with the pre-Socratic Greek thinkers who were writing poetry, and in poetry were these very important axioms, and the very first greatly determining until today, very determining notions and ideas and inventions. Socrates, when he was sort of putting down the foundation of moral philosophy, of philosophy in general, he used to have dialogues, and these dialogues may be interpreted also, in a sense, a kind of theater performances, because each were going from somewhere to somewhere, and there was masterfully what was created also, in a sense, how the whole composition was not only just to inform people, to convince them, but also to be able to give a kind of aesthetic pleasure. The same is Plato's Symposium, where actually the topic was love. And Theatron, the place for viewing, sorry for the typo, and Theoria has a common root. So it's all this kind of thing to look, to view, to consider, to examine. You can see that even theater, and as we could hear earlier from David, the story of Oedipus, it's not only the story of a troubled king, but also it is something very important that teaches you to watch, to see, and it's not by chance that he becomes blind in the end. And Tiresias, the very important personality, is also blind, and that is the way how he can see the future. We may want to talk about Aristotle poetics, how poetics and how aesthetic values are also in a systematic scientific field, and how it is created. Cicero with the oratory or the rhetoric, which is also both a science and an art, or Seneca with his very important moral philosophical thinking, and the place of how Augustinus and the whole Christian patristic philosophy was also based in many ways in his confessions, which you cannot really separate whether it's a piece of art or these are the very important sort of notions of future times. Not working well. And the meaning of poiesis, which is in Poetica, is emergence of something that previously did not exist, to make, to create. And this is again very much in the concept of art. And if we move on, which I hope I can, yes, there are the muses, and the muses were both for arts and sciences. So there was Clio for the historiography, there was Eurypyle for the poetry, you can see Thalia for the comedies, Melpomene for the tragedies, and so on, for dance, and you can find someone for Urania, for astrology. And you can also obviously there is a gender inequality because all are female. I wonder why and how was it possible that time? Probably because men were inspired by them, but yet it's very important that it becomes a very important kind of tradition, that all what you can expect, any kind of fertilization, any kind of inspiration, that's coming mainly from women. So that is again very important, that art and science was not separated in that sense and in that time, and it remains so later. If we want to go back to the meaning of art, it's always craft, it's workmanship, it's business, it's skill. If you buy a gelato artigianato, it means it's not an artistic ice cream, but it's an artistic that is made with the hands. And if you are thinking about a cathedral being built, you cannot really separate what is science, what is statics, what is about architecture, and what is about decoration, what is about the beauty that we want to create for its own sake. And this is when we are going toward to the septem artes liberales, the 7 free arts. That's again in early universities. Again, there is gender inequality because all are women. Grammar, rhetorics, dialectics, these were the artes sermonicales, and there was the artes reales, arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, music. And I have found also the foundation of the word illiberal, which I thought that was the invention of our politician. I turned out that it's the study only for economic reasons. So there are the studies which are beyond, which you do not do because you want to make a living. And these are the very important, and that was the basic, the whole Western university system. So this is again something very important, that art was in that way interpreted as science. Oops. And obviously there is all the time the interaction. If we go in the Middle Ages, we visit a cathedral, they can always find art and science interacting with the space, with the rhythm, with the proportions of a space, with decorations, colors, message, light, reflection, transparency. And you know that light didn't mean that we just want to see. Light had obviously a transcendental meaning and a bit more than that, and many more features. So this is again something very important. And once you went to a cathedral, it was absolutely carefully designed how the sun was moving and how the different types of windows will reflect the sun, which had obviously a kind of scientific notion, and obviously it has some kind of direct contact with the transcendental being. Obviously, there were different approaches. So I would say Alfred Speer, Hitler's architect, had another idea, and the wonderful modern or postmodern artists had a different vision. And you can also see how there is the dialogue between art and science, between space and decoration and many other features that are absolutely crucial if we want to think about the interaction of these two territories. And music, which will be Professor Mizsei's territory, again, music and mathematics and astrology, there were the angels, the music of the angels. They were representing the repetition what was happening in the zodiacs. And still today we have this kind of meaning of the music of the spheres. So this is again extremely important, how already in mathematics and in astrology there were that kind of musical foundations, how it was not possible to separate. Music is math with feeling. This is again what we every now and then can feel in a way. So that kind of interaction between the most kind of abstract, the most angelic kind of art and the most hardcore real science, mathematics is again a very important interaction. Obviously these interconnections you can see between art and science in applied art, which is all over, I mean in the chairs, in the building, in the cars. And obviously film industry is also an industry and an art at the very same time, and we are living with that. We cannot really separate these two things, not only in the case of Avatar, but in the movies of Fellini or other very important classics. You always feel that kind of interchangeability of art and science. Or there is Andrei Kertész in photography, how science is providing the means to express yourself in an artistic manner is absolutely crucial. And this is the way how you can again find the proportions between light and darkness, between different types of tones and different types of impulses that you want to deal with. Which is also important in the next step, if I can make that science is inspiring art. You know, futurism was very important in that sense, and that was again a breakthrough in the early 20th century. And constructivism, which this is a theater stage of Meyerhold, who was a fantastic Soviet-Russian theater director, later a victim of Stalinism, and how you can see that this is what you want to see as a kind of stage for even for a medieval play, or he was doing a lot of very important classics and moderns. So this is again a very important source of inspiration, and obviously art is and was inspiring science all the time. You can see Leonardo with Da Vinci's kind of instrument to fly, and you can also know and see that how important anatomy was all the time and is all the time for painters and for everyone who is interested in that. Would art versus science, is there such difference that something is objective or subjective? We shall briefly return that later. One is the imaginative and the other is the empiristic? Is the aesthetic expression contradicts the logical expression? Is it something synthetic and the other is analytic? Fantasy is against observation. Catharsis versus concrete proofs. And there is the answer, or at least is it always so, or a chance to an answer, for example, in quantum theory. When Niels Bohr, the great Danish physicist, was inventing quantum theory and the fuse theory and later contributing to Manhattan Project, he was heavily inspired by Søren Kierkegaard, the great Danish writer and thinker and philosopher, because the leap of faith that something is not logically coming from a certain set of arguments was extremely inspiring for him. His father was teaching at the Bohr's father was teaching at Copenhagen University, where Hans Hedtoft, a great Kierkegaard scholar, was teaching. And that was the way how Niels Bohr later at length was commenting on how Kierkegaard was inspirational for him, and that is not the only case. And the philosophy of science, the two great classics of the 20th century philosophy of science, Imre Lakatos, the Hungarian-born philosopher, said that the role of imagination is absolutely basic, and intuitionist science is something that is absolutely crucial for any kind of important breakthrough. Proofs and Refutations is his major masterpiece, proving that. And Paul Feyerabend and his friend, and talking about science and science as art, again something extremely crucial for those 20th century thinkers for whom science was really the basis of the future notions to come. And obviously there is the interference between art and science. In visuality you can experiment not only with lights, but you can experiment with forms, with vision, with optical notions like Victor Vasarely, and in psychology, and there is again Oedipus and the Sphinx and the story that we have heard at the beginning of David's talk or David's lecture. And finally, which I also want, if I can show it to you, which I hope, yes, but there is even more. I mean, George Orwell, when he was writing this dystopia, it was extremely crucial, and political scientists didn't go that far as he went. And then obviously time came when all his concept became in a sort of proven. But if we want to think about natural sciences, exploration, oceanography, then there is Jules Verne, the French writer, extremely popular also in Hungary, who helped in an absolutely important way to open up our minds toward science in talking about in literary forms. Oh, sorry. Again, I was going a bit too fast. And obviously there is again, let's go back a bit. Yes. Reaching out to new areas. So again, there are the lights, for example, something that we were using only in buildings, in paintings and other places, but there is a museum of light, there is a light art museum, so it itself can be a kind of creation, a part of creation which is the most subtle. And also the digital art and all the related fields are also extremely important in that sense, and that is a totally new area to explore and to be able to aware that art is something that can find, again, all the way through the metamorphosis and can find always new and new means for those expressions that are so basic. And obviously there's the future art that's living with us. There is the consumerism. You can see a Shakespeare duck, and art for sale and art as marketing tool. And also there is Walter Benjamin's very important question about what is happening with the art in the age of mechanical reproduction, and Andy Warhol's Mona Lisa is there again as providing as a kind of answer. So this is what finally we can think or make, in a sense, summarize origins of art and science, how we can understand the world we live in, how we can communicate through generations, how we can make life more meaningful, what kind of inquiries into the nature and the universe, inside ourselves and outside, can be sort of gained, how we can make sense of all what we experience, or at least try to, how we can leave a trace behind by artistic and scientific inspiration and creation, and how to provide comfort to be confronting in an age which is absolutely not comfortable, and how to respond, to act, to create, to shape the future, if any will be. So thank you for your attention with this selfie.
Thank you so much, and I would like to give the floor to Zoltán Mizsei.
Dear folks, I have a déjà vu. As we're coming closer to the vine, music comes into the stage. Maybe I will, yes, thank you, turn back from the previously touched philosophical, metaphysical dimensions into somehow more practical ground. Paradoxically, this more practical ground is music. There is a good and strong sign of better tomorrow, but this sign is buried in yesterday's tomb, or even yesterday's tomb. Here in Kőszeg, I cannot say anything else that this town had its balanced and flourishing cultural life at the turn of the last 2 centuries. And that was the case all around the country. The decline only has started after the Second World War. Our best practices lies in our past, and our task is to bring it back to the light of our recent society. Yesterday, really yesterday, we heard ideas about how a city cannot be a solution for future living. Yes, maybe, but I have an addition. In my opinion, size matters. Maybe tragic end is only waiting for a huge megapolis. Maybe a tiny rural village can be abandoned due to its inhabitants moving into towns. But maybe a little city, which size, for example, was formed in the Middle Ages, could be a possible survivor, like this Kőszeg here. Or like other cities, even a capital like Budapest, which is originally also an artificial formation of little towns, now as they are called districts. At this size, the private and common space are just in a good proportion of harmony, where private or family life can fit well into community measures. I'm sure they didn't want to get things bigger, faster, and more. It is our task now to think smaller, slower, and less. So here at my institute, I've been doing researches, composing music, writing articles, publishing books and CDs, organizing workshops and music festivals here for a decade. And now I would like to present my Kőszeg showcase, my new horizon. To formulate my presentation, I choose quotations of Professor David Max to each slide as a motto. These quotes are very straightforward and provocative statements of a professional musician and philosopher. Since we share common ground, at least as musicians, I harmonize with them at a level of 100%. These sentences speak for themselves. I tried to add my own examples as a local proof for them. Therefore, I believe this common panel is something like a beginning of a beautiful friendship. So here we have Kőszeg in this institute, this method called the sounding city, which is about, as you can read, the quotation, all forms of art have the ability to transform people, and therein lies its power to transform our societies and our relationship with nature. So all the quotations are from that interview with David Max at the UniArts Helsinki from last year. So this is what this is the assembly, what we are doing here. The main task is bringing the archival material back to life, and therefore we organize music academy, like masterclasses, contemporary community music improvisation, which is very new thing, how a community like you can improvise music together. Maybe you will do this soon, okay? And we deal with soundscape and sound art, and after each slides I will show a little example what I think about this. And we are charging new pathways into music education, like we are going into music schools here, doing atypical music classes. They love it very much because there's a new guy with band and not the teacher who they just, treat very well all the year, comes into the school and it is very effective, I can say. Because we are doing musical games about singing houses, sound hunters, competition, and sonification games. You will get to know to each other terms soon. Okay, that's the short example of not an imaginary infrastructure, but an arts festival in a proper infrastructure. That's the main square or the historical middle of this city. So it went, and probably it will go like, we invite musicians or groups to give a concert every evening, but in the afternoon, the musicians individually spread out into courtyards, spaces, and the audience is invited to walk around, and they have to be oriented by themselves, by their hearing. So what they hear, they follow the path, and this gives a very unique sound of the space, interchangeable soundscapes into each other. So there's just a 2 minutes demonstration of this. Yeah, thank you. You know this pathway. Of course, contemporary dancers were also invited to fill the space with movement. So this is what it happens when you leave them. That was totally improvised, needless to say. So these kind of things can happen in Kőszeg as well. In the summer. The next slide has this quote. Tragically, however, when we start solving issues like climate change with art, we immediately bring art into the realm of knowledge instead. Art must not be propaganda. It is not a way to decorate information. This is not what it's for. They speak for themselves. So I just brought an example which you can have yourself as well. If you have a mobile phone with network connection, and maybe if you have an earplug, probably all of you have this with you. When you visit the iASK website, Gerge, can you just click on this? There's a link, Sounding City Soundwalk. Because if you go to the Institute's YouTube channel, you may find a toy, this soundwalk. The only thing they have to do is you just exit this house, and you know this little narrow pathway down to the square. And you can see at the YouTube channel, at the playlist, this picture which represents a map where, yes, thank you. So number one, you play number one, and it tells you to go through the gate. Number two is a pathway to number three, and so on. So you can do this about 20-minute sound walk by yourself. And by doing this, you will hear my composed music and some information about the history of those sites. So this is how we use art as not a propaganda, but science and history and arts together. And also you can find other goodies at iASK website. The Music Institute is called Collegium Sonorum, so you just Google that. And mehetünk tovább. Ja, jó, oké. Nem baj, akkor nem kell. Igen. This music can be heard on our CD, Kőszeg Sounding City Inner Soundwalk. You can find it in the store or in the Festetics Palace. My first sounding summary of my work here. Here you can hear a Gregorian song for the Holy Virgin Mary, whose statue is also in the main square there, which was field recorded of myself playing live on the instrument that you can see, which was designed and installed underneath the dome of the city well. So you can visit it. It plays music at noon, no, at 11 o'clock, at noon, at 1 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock. 1 minute after, because it waits for the big bell to sound, okay? So if you have a free time, just visit this site and you can hear music which is programmed into this physical instrument. It's not a MIDI, it's not an electronic instrument. There are metallic plates hit by little hitters. The control is digital, but the sound is pure, authentic, physical sound. There's a story why I choose this melody, but that's for another time. It's a very typical story here with the Kőszegians. And digital accompaniment to this melody is somewhat music was composed strictly upon the measurement and the ornaments of the building itself. So as a musician, I treated this building as a score. You know, lines and dots for me are musical notes. So melody going upwards and downwards, these arches, rhythmical patterns, these repetitions of dots, and so on. So I just pictured this instrument or this building as a musical score, and when this instrument came into this, I got there and played music on this. And this is a combination of intangible and tangible heritage. For various reasons, Western societies today are primarily concerned with the market value of everything. It is depressing that certain cultural values have disappeared in my lifetime, and music has become some frivolous luxury in our society. Now more than ever, we need to be able to argue why music and music education are essential to a healthy society, says David Max. So here I'm very proud of my first book that you can see, of local music published last year by iASK. The content, a study and some 15 musical scores, is a precious example of our ancestors' ability to keep up a high level of local music composing, music making, and music enjoyment. Other volumes are about to publish in the near future. Ta-da! Church arias from Kőszeg, so Genian Kőszeg music for the first time in the 20 and the 21st century. And this book can be downloaded from our website free of charge, so you can use it, you can read it, you can play music from it wherever you want to treat your company with some Kőszeg church arias. Here is an example. He's the composer. That was his house. He was a music teacher at the military school. So this is the only gentleman without a hat. Without a hat. No, there's another one. Yeah, all the others are soldiers. And this is his handwriting, which we found in the archive of the church, actually up in the tower. And this is how it gets back to life again, this kind of music. We are performing it live as well, quite regularly.
To you.
So this is what you do when you don't have an opera house in town, but you want to have an operatic aria. Then you compose an Ave Maria, like an operatic aria, and you go into church and you have your aria there. So you don't have to go to Vienna to the opera house. Okay. Finally, if you have a few minutes, some interactiveness, because the last quote is, "It is wonderful that people are all over the world come together to talk about music education, since music teachers have a sacred task." Thank you, David. "What they teach can profoundly change individuals and their relationship to the world." So when I go to school, every time I play this game of solmification, everyone knows the sol-fa system, right? Ut, re, mi, fa, sol, la. At least in Western culture, but maybe it's universal. And the system comes from a medieval text, when a text was formed into these sol-fa syllables, like ut, veant laxis, re sonare fibris, mira gestorum, and so on. But you can turn this vice versa. So every written text has vowels, and since this sol-fa system represents the 5 basic vowels, like ut, re, mi, fa, sol, and la, so that the a is doubled, that gives a little freedom to compose. So since then, every written text can automatically convert it into music. Like Institute of Advanced Studies, Kőszeg, I, U, E, O, A, E, U, I, E, O, E goes mi, mi, ut, re, sol, la, fa, re, ut, mi, re, sol, re. And you can play the melody. And in good old medieval times, every composition was put on an existing melody. So this is the arrangement with some ornamentation in a Renaissance style. Finally, we can sing the UNESCO Most Winter School melody. U, E, O, I, E, O, like ut, re, sol, sol, mi, re, sol. UNESCO Most Winter School. Together. UNESCO Most Winter School. 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 Thank you very much.